This morning we'll be in Exodus chapter 23, verses 1 through 19. We're going to talk about being a people of integrity this morning. I think today's reading from God's law will be particularly applicable to us. And as you read through the law of God yourself, maybe through a devotional time, or maybe just this morning as I'm reading it to you, or maybe reading through the Bible in a year, whatever reason you find yourself reading through the book of Exodus or Deuteronomy and reading about the law of God, I want you to also think about reading this law as you would reading through the book of Proverbs. Because part of the beauty of the law and part of the point of God's law is not just a list of do's and don'ts, but the purpose is to impart to us wisdom for living. And so this morning we're going to talk about how these laws were meant to teach us to be a people of integrity and to teach us how to live in this world. These laws are written for our instruction. Sometimes we have difficulty with the Old Testament because we don't know what to do with the law. We don't understand it because we're no longer under the old covenant. Well, our ancestors were, the people of Israel were, and I say they're our ancestors not by physical descent, but by faith. By faith, we are the children of Abraham. By faith, we are the sons and daughters of Israel. And that's far better than physical lineage. So this that is written to Israel is also written to us. It just plays a different role in our life. And that role for us this morning is to be enlightened to the heart of God, what is on his heart, and also to impart wisdom to us. So I'm going to begin reading here in chapter 23 and read through verse 19. You must not spread a false report. Do not join the wicked to be a malicious witness. You must not follow a crowd in wrongdoing. Do not testify in a lawsuit and go along with a crowd to pervert justice. Do not show favoritism to a poor person in his lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's stray ox or donkey, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you lying helpless under its load, and you want to refrain from helping it, you must help with it. You must not deny justice to a poor person among you in his lawsuit. Stay far away from false accusation. Do not kill the innocent and the just, because I will not justify the guilty. You must not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and corrupts the words of the righteous. You must not oppress the resident alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be a resident alien because you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. Sow your seed in the land for 6 years and gather its produce, but every seventh year you are to let it rest, but every seventh year remain uncultivated, so that the poor among your people may eat from it, and the wild animals may consume what they leave. Do the same with your vineyard, and the same with your olive grove. Do your work for 6 days. But on the seventh day, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, you rest, and the son of your female slave as well as the resident alien may be refreshed. Pay strict attention to everything I've said to you. You must not invoke the name of other gods. They must not be heard on your lips. Celebrate a festival in my honor 3 times a year. Observe the festival of unleavened bread as I have commanded you. You are to eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Abib. Because you came out of Egypt in that month, no one is to appear before me empty-handed. Also observe the festival of harvest with the first fruits of your produce from what you sow in the field. And observe the festival of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather your produce from your field. 3 times a year all your males are to appear before the Lord. You must not offer the blood of my sacrifices with anything leavened. The fat of my festival offering must not remain until morning. Bring the best of your first fruits of your land to the house of the Lord your God. You must not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now, what does this have to do with us today? I can't wait to talk to you about boiling a young goat in its mother's milk, but I'm going to save that for last so you'll be in tune the whole time. How does this teach us, these verses, how do they teach us to be people of integrity? How do they teach us to live rightly? One way is we're going to talk about this morning is being a person of integrity in the public square, in front of others. Things are a lot different in our world than they were in ancient Israel, but the impulse to sin and the temptations remain the same. And I think the first couple of verses of this easily apply to our modern situation in a way that ancient Israelites could not have dreamed, and in fact should serve as a warning to us. I believe, as it says here, you must not spread a false report, do not join the wicked to be a malicious witness, do not join a crowd in wrongdoing. I think this is easier today in ways that ancient Israel could never have imagined. It's easier to spread a false report today than it has ever been. When we retweet something or share something on social media, Facebook, that is not true, we have fallen guilty of violating these rules, these laws. We've failed the law of God. We're spreading a false report and we're being a malicious witness. Think about that. So if what you share is untrue, if what you say on social media is untrue, potentially seen by billions of people. Now, we're probably not that popular here, but it's possible. You don't know how many tens, hundreds, or thousands of people might see it. And so you will be spreading a false report. At the speed of light, you could spread a lie from here to China. Yeah, that was something that Israel could not do. I went to reading about this, and there was a Washington Post report. It was put out in September of 2021. So we're not talking about ancient history. During 2020, fake news sites, fake news. Now, when I say fake news, these are not people who just messed up. These are people who purposefully, for propaganda reasons, put out lies to trick you, to make you mad, and to cause division in our country, or just because they're mean, absurd people. They're just putting out fake news. This is not counting satire sources who are trying to be funny, and y'all thought that they were serious. These are people who are trying to trick you, okay? Fake news sites got 6 times the number of clicks that real news outlets got. 6 times. Now, before you get your conservative dander up or liberal, they studied both kinds. Okay, this is people who are making up what would be considered liberal fake news and what is considered conservative fake news. That's the junk people click on, and they're just sitting at home somewhere making up stuff, and they got 6 times the traffic that real places got. And that leads us to verse 2. You must not follow a crowd in wrongdoing. Just because something's got a bunch of likes and shares does not mean it's true. And it's easy to get caught up in a crowd, even if it is an online crowd. It's easy to get caught up in a crowd, a tribe, or a mob. This is what happens when you pick a team. You begin to want to believe the propaganda about the other team. You want to believe the worst. So when these people who are sitting wherever they are, whether they're enemy governments or what, are cranking out false report, propaganda, it is in your nature to want to believe the worst of those not on your team. And so what happens is we read these untrue things about the right or left, depending on whatever issue, whatever side you belong to. You want to believe it, and then you want to share it to talk about how bad they are. And the issue is, it's not this. If it stayed in cyberspace, it'd be fine, I guess. It wouldn't be as bad. But this stuff has real-world consequences. It has torn apart families. It has caused riots and rebellion in our own country because people start falling for propaganda and they start falling for conspiracy theories, and it wreaks havoc. And right here in this law, it's telling you, don't fall for that junk. It's not helping your peace of mind. It's not helping your fellow man, and we're interacting with it 6 times the rate that we recognize real news. And here's why. Because these folks can generate lies quicker than people can study for what the truth is. It don't take but a second to do lies. It takes, look, journalists are a blessing from God. I'm going to tell you that right now. Now, you may not always agree with them, but folks who take their job seriously and fact check and search for truth, that's a gift. And the fact that we have freedom of press is a gift. But it takes time to report real news. And that's why they lose to clickbait sites, is because they can't churn out information that is true as fast as people can make up garbage. So that's what happens in our world. Everybody's in a rush, and so things get reported terribly, and then we share it, and we become culpable because we've joined in with wrongdoing. A lot of it is because we want to believe the worst about those we consider not with us. And that's contrary to the Christian ethic, because our enemies are not flesh and blood. We're supposed to be serving people and loving them. And the most important thing to us is the kingdom of God and the coming of the Christ, his death for sin and his resurrection. I'm not saying that politics and things aren't important, but they're nowhere near as important as that. And frankly, almost none of us in here have the expertise to understand the ramifications of half the stuff we fuss about. Jesus said, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." That's Matthew 5:43 through 48. We're supposed to be kind to our enemies, not form mobs against them. And we are not supposed to be seeking to enact street justice on outrages that are figments, oftentimes, of our own imaginations. We are supposed to think well of each other and honor one another. We are supposed to treat one another as if we are made in the image of God. And so we need to back off of getting so excited about bad reports. We're supposed to treat people fairly. Look at verse 3. Do not show favoritism to a poor person in his lawsuit. But now let's look at verse 6. You must not deny justice to a poor person among you in his lawsuit. What is going on? We got this within 3 verses. Well, first of all it's saying is that being poor, or rich for that matter, but right now we're talking about poor. Being poor in and of itself is no virtue. It is not a virtue to be poor. But it should not be a detriment to you when you seek justice in the law. So we're not supposed to root for the poor person only because they are poor. And we're not supposed to despise the poor person because they are poor. We are supposed to seek truth and justice. Poor people, this may come as a shock. Poor people can be evil and greedy and wrong, just like rich people or middle-class people. And the opposite is also true. They can be kind, and they can be giving, and they can be wronged, just like anyone else. And so we're supposed to have sober judgment, and we're supposed to be people of integrity to investigate a matter. Just because someone is in a position where they might be oppressed, have less power, clout, whatever it is that they don't have, it doesn't mean that they're always right, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're always wrong. And so what happens to us is I say we because I think it's in the church and everywhere because it's just part of human nature. We have become an entire country of judges. An entire country of judges who know everything. And we are far too gullible. I used to hate April Fool's Day. I hate April Fool's Day. I hate April Fool's Day because I don't like being tricked. And I like to think the best of people, and I don't like getting tricked. But now I like April Fool's Day because it's the only day on social media where people check their source to see if somebody's pulling their leg. If you treated every day like April Fool's Day, we wouldn't be sharing this dumb stuff as much. Somebody might be tricking you out there. And if you ever see a meme of Jesus arm wrestling Satan, if you share that, I am cutting off your internet. I can't actually do that legally. So, don't do that. Jesus and the devil are not arm wrestling. And the only reason a lot of you are laughing because you've seen that. Some of y'all are thinking, man, my mama shared that thing. Sorry. You should send her a copy of this sermon. Be a person of integrity in a public square and stop having your chain yanked by people who do not have your best interest in heart and in fact are bent on ruining us. Or they're just jerks. Unplug from that stuff. You'll be fine. You'll be fine not knowing what's going on. You will. You'll be all right. And all of your contribution that you've made, you probably did it for you. You thought you were doing it for others, but you were just feeling good about yourself. I know this because of myself. Being a person of integrity in the public square means being sober-minded, and it means not getting involved in stuff that you don't know what you're talking about anyways. And then we ought to have integrity in our work and faith. And so some of this sounds a little bit foreign to us in our day and age. But we need to talk about it because there's an important lesson here. How scary do you suppose it was not to sow crops in the 7th year in Israel? I think 2 generations ago, my grandparents would have understood this fear. My kids will not understand this fear. And I thank God for that, honestly. But we need to understand what God is asking of his people. This was an almost completely agrarian society. In fact, you can go back. The old censuses were very, very thorough from Alabama. I think I read one in like 1920, 1910. And in those censuses, they not only took account of the number of people, but they also listed what their professions were. It was really neat. And you say, wow, how did they do that? Well, there wasn't as many people. There wasn't as much stuff to keep up with. There was not many people. And so I think at that time, like 85% of Alabama, 90 almost, was agrarian. They were farmers. And it's pretty eye-opening if you go back and read those censuses, because there were like 6 professional musicians in the state of Alabama. It's neat stuff like it. 35 blacksmiths, stuff like that. So you can go back and look at those. That'd just be for fun. So you think about 85% of the people whose living consisted of the fact that they planted crops. And for a year, they weren't supposed to plant anything. My grandparents, my father, this is my dad's generation. My grandfather planted what was called truck patches. Anybody here know what that is? Some people do. And basically, it was like a little 5-acre, he had a bunch of kids, 5-acre little piece of farmland where they grew produce, and that's what they ate. That was their food. They were not supposed to do this in Israel in the 7th year. And if you know anything about planting seeds, you need to plant on the next year, not 2 years off, because why? They don't germinate as well. You lose a percentage of germination. Germination, just so you know, means the ability to sprout. So if you plant them the next year, maybe you'll get 90% of them come up as corn. But if you wait 2 years, you might only get 60% pop up as corn. So you see the problem. We're waiting 2 years. Not only is our livelihood depending on crops, but we won't have crops this year. What happens if they don't come up next year? We're not just looking about our income. We're looking at starvation if this doesn't work. Take a year off in those days and you could be inviting devastating famine. And so the Lord is asking them to trust him. That is the point. And the Lord says here, it's not because I want to deprive you of wealth. It's not what he says. He says, I want the poor people to be able to eat, and I want the wild creatures to have something to eat. So if you didn't sow your field for the next year, what happens is you have volunteer crops. That's what we call it. So when you're out there gathering your wheat or whatever they were gathering, some of the seed is going to fall on the ground. You're not going to get it all. And if you don't come in and till and plow, then the next year some of that will volunteer and come up by itself. And if that was your field, you're not supposed to harvest it. It's for the poor who don't have a field to sow, and they can come and they can get it. And the birds and things can eat from those fields that were left wild. That must have been terrifying for them. Could they trust the Lord? There's a second thing here. Don't work yourself to death. So it was let the farmland be off for a year. That means farmers for a year didn't farm. What'd they do? I guess they whittled wood. I don't know what they did. They probably sat around and talked about farming next year, or how much seed they've got saved up, or how things are going, or how they're keeping the mice out of their grain. I don't know. But for a year, they did not sow or work. Their donkeys didn't plow. Their mules didn't plow, or their oxen didn't plow. Whatever they had, everything got a year off. Maybe they just cleaned up their stuff. Maybe they worked on warped plowshares. I don't know. They didn't have a thing to do for a year. Everybody got a break. They were supposed to do this on the Sabbath as well. 6 days they were supposed to work, and on the seventh day they took the day off, not only for themselves, but so that their ox and donkey could rest, as well as their female slaves, as well as the resident alien may be refreshed. God gave the Sabbath day not because he needed something, but because he wanted us to have a break. Don't work yourself to death. And then he says, so this is based on trusting the Lord, right? If you'll trust me, you're not going to starve to death. You'll have more if you'll take a year off than you will if you don't. And you will be better 6 out of 7 days than you will 7 out of 7. But you have to have your trust, your faith in the Lord. And we have to show up and do our time before the Lord. And here's how the Lord tells them to show up. I love this. So he says here there's 3 times a year. So don't sow in this year. Take the 6th day off. And these are 3 times you must present yourself before me. Show up. And every single time it's a party. That's what he's wanting to have. Festival of Unleavened Bread. What was that? What was the Festival of Unleavened Bread? That was the celebration of the fact that they came up out of Israel. The fact that they were freed from slavery. For 7 days they were supposed to eat unleavened bread. And the reason that they're eating unleavened bread is because they remember God saved us so quick from Egypt we didn't have time for the yeast to rise. Now, I am something of an amateur bread maker. I've made it like 6 or 8 times now. And only one time did I mistake 2 teaspoons of salt for tablespoons of salt. And by the way, if you put tablespoons of salt in your homemade bread instead of teaspoons, your bread will not be good. It will look good, but it won't be good. Everyone will eat it politely, and they'll say, ooh, this is a little bit salty. And they'll put a bunch of butter on it, but it won't help. When you make bread and you put yeast in it, you need to let that stuff sit for at least a day, and that's when it gets good, because it takes time for that yeast to work through the dough. But in Israel, when God saved them from slavery, when they're eating that, Mama, why are we eating unleavened bread? Well, that's because when God saved us from Egypt, we didn't have time for the bread to rise. He said, get your sandals on and grab your stick, we're leaving. They didn't have time to wait on the yeast. And so for 7 days, they celebrated the fact that God delivered them with haste from the land of Egypt, took them out from bondage, and brought them into this beautiful land in which they now live. That sounds like a good time. Then they're supposed to celebrate 2 harvests, one early harvest and one in the late. And they're supposed to bring their produce before the Lord, and they're supposed to feast before the Lord. They are supposed to feast. They're supposed to celebrate the fact that they've had a bountiful harvest, that God has been good to them once again and has provided for them. So 3 times God says, show up, and when you do, be ready to have a good time, because we're going to celebrate in the presence of God his faithfulness to us. Now, a stingy person will look at this and say, oh man, God's taking our first fruits from us. No, you get to give them, and you get to say, here you go, Lord, this is the best stuff we got, and we still have plenty left over. And we're going to have a party while we're here. Their duty then was to celebrate their freedom, to celebrate the harvest, to gather up their food, and to enjoy their company of their family and neighbors. In fact, if you look in the Passover, which we've already talked about in Exodus, if you live next door to somebody and you've got this big fat ram, y'all are going to kill that thing for Passover or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You've got this big fat ram, and you're like, there's no way me and my newlywed wife and my little kid can eat all this ram, and my neighbor also has a small family. So we're going to invite them over. We're going to kill this thing, and we can't leave any of it till the morning. So it's like, oh, I can't eat another bite. You got to eat some more, Brad. We can't leave it till tomorrow. Okay, I guess I can eat one more rib. That's the kind of celebration I like to be invited to. And they say, why are you eating so much? Nobody said, oh, I feel bad. It's like, oh, we've got to eat this. The Lord said so. We've just got to keep eating this barbecue till we're just full, can't eat another bite. They didn't have any boring football games or NASCAR to fall asleep to, so I don't know what they watched while they fell asleep in their recliners, but that was a good day. Don't even, he says, don't even have the names of other gods on your lips. Don't even talk about those gods. Have integrity in your work. Have integrity in your faith, and have integrity in the public square. Don't even talk about those others. They're not worth it. You don't, when you're dating, you don't talk about your ex. That's dumb. When you love the Lord, you don't talk about those other gods because they're worthless. You love the Lord your God and forget those other things. And so now then, everybody's excited about this. You must not boil, it says kid. You got to be careful. I like that my modern translation says young goat. Yeah, a young goat is a kid. A baby rabbit is a kitten. That's just for free. So, do not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. What is the theological significance of that? Because it's mean, man. That's all. You go look up commentaries and they're like, oh, there's some pagan rituals, blah, blah, blah. There's no evidence for that. I can't find a single source cited where the pagans were like, hey, let's take kids and boil them in their mother's milk. But what I can tell you is it seems exceedingly cruel to take a creature that is nourished by a thing and then kill it and boil it in that stuff. And the Lord's just saying, don't be cruel. I care about the animals. The Lord cares about the animals. How do we know? Because on the Sabbath day, on the Sabbath year, when all that wheat was growing volunteer, whatever people didn't eat, the little birds got to go eat it, and God cares about them. We'd probably still have quail in Alabama if we raised crops like this now. It's like, my grandfather would have been happy to hear that. That's why I think God commanded this, because He's good and He's kind, and every single law you see in here has that benefit of kindness toward us for our growth and for our good. Don't you want to be a person of integrity, a person who thinks sober-mindedly and doesn't have to worry about what everybody else is worried about? I do, that's for sure. I do see the love of God and the practical outworking of His gospel in these laws. And I see here the primary commands to love God and to love our neighbor, which is what Jesus said all of these laws are based on. You know, I read to you a while ago, Matthew 5:43 through 48, where He said for us to love our enemy. Jesus didn't just come out with that out of nowhere. That was not a new law when He said that. When He said, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, those people were wrong. Because right here it says, if you come across your enemy's stray ox or donkey, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you lying helpless under its load, and you want to refrain from helping it, you must help with it. So God cares about not only your enemy, but also your enemy's donkey. And I would say, why be a jerk to your neighbor's donkey? It's not his fault that he belongs to your neighbor. When Jesus said, love your enemies, He's pulling from the Old Testament law. He's not, like, I'm sure there was some guy when Jesus said that and he thought, well, that's what it says in Deuteronomy 23 anyhow. Isn't that what it says? He'd ask his neighbor, and his neighbor's like, I don't know. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's in there. I'm pretty sure it's in there somewhere. That's my favorite Bible quote. Doesn't it say in there somewhere? Yeah. So I see primary commands to love our God and to love our neighbor. So here's the practical application for you. I'm going to put it on a real low shelf. Do not get caught up in social media hysteria and spread false reports of dumbness. Because I'm checking, and here I'll be disappointed. I'll be like, no, don't say that. That's so dumb. Even if it's true, why do you need to share that? What joy does it give you to share a bad report? Just like people's Easter pictures and their kid pictures and stuff, like, oh, that's a great picture. Or jokes. they're fine. I like jokes. I would not make social media platforms your primary place of spreading your thoughts and beliefs, because your impact in that is going to be pretty small. Where should you be doing that? In your circle of friendships and face-to-face, privately. I don't mean privately like you got to hide, but like just go visit with actual people and talk to them and be friendly. Talk to them about things. If they want to talk about stuff, talk about stuff. Your area of effect's much smaller. It's a lot easier not to be taken out of context, and there are things that need to be done face-to-face or on the phone that cannot be accomplished through email or social media, and every single business person will tell you that. Some things are good for email, but sometimes you got to pick up a phone and call your coworker so you are sure that they understand that they're picking up what you're trying to put down. You don't want to be miscommunicating tone or whether or not I'm kidding or whether or not I'm serious. Stay out of the dumb fusses and love your enemies. So every time you see something bad about your enemy, pray for them and feel bad for them. Pray that God might save them, change them, bring them to repentance. Can you see how Jesus drew from these laws as he was teaching his disciples on the way? And he's still teaching us through them to this day. The law of God is not contrary to the gospel. It's not the law's fault that we don't keep it. If only we would listen and gain wisdom from the law of God to help us on our journey in grace. And how does the law help us in our journey to grace? By teaching us about the heart of God and to teach us about our own hearts. By telling us what to do and what not to do, we can learn something about ourselves and about our God. Now, we are saved by grace through faith and not by works, but we don't want to be a workless people, do we? I don't. I want to be a person of integrity. I want to be a Christian that people know not only by what I say, but by what I do. And the law can help us with that. So, bring to the Lord what is the Lord's. If he demanded, and I say demanded, if he commanded the first fruits to be brought to him, then we should do the same. We should bring to him our best. We should show up, and we should party in his presence, because we are a redeemed people who've been gifted a family by grace, and we are so blessed and fortunate. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you for this morning and this opportunity to look at your law. I pray that we will be kind to one another. I pray that we will be good to the resident alien in our midst. I pray that we will not show favoritism to the poor or against them. I pray that we will be fair and just to all people, that we are sober-minded and thoughtful and reflective, and that we seek for truth and don't let ourselves get carried away by our own bias or prejudice. Lord, help us to be righteous people and to think as Christ thought. Lord, continue to renew our minds and give us the mind of Christ. Father, if there's someone here who has never loved you and has not known what it means to be loved by you, and Lord, just thinking of that breaks my heart, that there might be someone here who does not know what it means to be loved by you. And I pray, God, that you would have mercy on them and reveal to them your infinite, boundless love for them through Christ. And that through that love, they will be broken of sin and that they will be saved from their shame. Father, help us this morning. Bless us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. If you'll please stand, we're going to sing a song together. As we sing, this is our opportunity to think about the things which we have heard through God's word. As we sing together, I pray God will apply these things to our hearts.